Is there any delay? So I think I'll use this.
Yeah. Sometimes I get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, I might grab a bat, I don't know. My wrath, my blood boils over like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show. So have you ever felt betrayed? Switches how you see things, realize something needs change. Cause I know you got me f***ed up. Let me show you what's up. Cause enough is enough. I'll take a face full of pavement just to make a statement. I know there's no turning back. Oh God, adrenaline wasted, so mad I can taste it. I know there's no turning back. Cause enough is enough. I'll take a face full of pavement just to make a statement. I know there's no turning back. Oh God, adrenaline wasted, so mad I can taste it. I know there's no turning back. Cause enough is enough. I'll take a face full of pavement just
I am back at my desk. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Do I need to turn this up? We barely have audio. We're just gonna let it roll. So how is everyone doing today? I am your host with Earler Project Reptiles. I also go by Freddy with the Snake or Freddy with the Reptiles. And I have a very special guest with me, and her name is Savvy Scales. Say what's up, Savvy Scales.
Hi, Fred. How you doing?
I'm wonderful. So tell me a little bit about what you do, or or tell the audience what you how'd you get started into reptiles?
Well, I started keeping them as pets and started with that, and I ended up saying, you know what? These are such amazing creatures. I wanted to share my love and passion for these animals with other people, especially children who, unfortunately, they grow up with understanding that snakes can be scary or bad sometimes, and I want to, rule that out and, show them how these guys should not be feared, and instead they should be respected and actually are really great pets. So I do education and breeding. I do private events and public events, as well as some hobbyist breeding. So I breed ball pythons, crested geckos, hognoses, and a new project will be rosy boas.
That sounds amazing. So, as I have my sip of coffee, when I do shows, I have a bunch of people ask me about ball pythons and especially new owners. So, we're going to talk about that. So, what is the first thing that someone should do when they're thinking about owning a ball python, either for a kid or as an adult?
Well, I would recommend the very first thing is to do your research. The first things you're going to want to look into is, what kind of housing is this animal going to need? How long is this as a commitment, especially for the younger kids? Is this something that your child is ready for, especially if it's a snake? As a ball python, they need to have frozen thawed or live rodents, and you want to make sure that you're prepared to do that in case your child is not. And you want to make sure that you're prepared to do that for the life of the snake, because these animals are not short-lived snakes. They're going to want to be able to, be cared for in their hopefully forever home whenever you get them. So you're going to want to do your research for, enclosure size, heating and lighting requirements, and how long the animal's going to live, and how long, what you're going to feed the animal, and if you're going to be able to keep up with that.
I perfectly agree with that statement. I'm going to go into a little backstory on myself. I started as a kid. I wanted a snake as well. And kids, I'm going to let you know, it took my parents 12 years for them to say yes. So do your research, watch some videos, even go to reptile shows, ask other vendors. So like she said, do some research. And we're going to dive into the next question. So what would be a good size for your first ball python?
A good size of enclosure?
No, the size of the ball python.
Good size of the ball python, okay. So most people go ahead and jump into getting a baby or a juvenile, and I feel it depends on your circumstance. If you want to get a rescued ball python and you're not necessarily particular as to what they look like with pattern and color, then, look at the reptile rescues. There are plenty of normal ball pythons that make excellent pets, and they're already at their full-grown size, so all you have to do is get a forever enclosure for this animal, opposed to if you get a baby, then you're going to have to either upgrade or have a lot of clutter in its forever reptile make it feel secure. So I personally think it depends on your circumstance as to what size you get. But if you're getting a snake for a younger child, I would recommend a larger snake just because sometimes babies can be a little bit more shy or they can be a little bit more nippy if they happen to be on that side. I mean, all snakes have their own personality. And so sometimes the older they are, the larger they are, the more laid back and social they are, and easier it is for the child to be able to handle them and not worry about harming the snake.
Yes. So I would do an average about 300 to 400 grams as a first timer, and I would stick closer to the male side versus the females because, like she stated, that ball pythons can get pretty big. So that goes back to the research because males can get about 3 to 4 feet long, or let me rephrase that, everyone. Males get to 3 to 4. Females get 4 to 5. So make sure you do your research, y'all, and determine what's going to be best because we don't want ball pythons roaming it out in the wild. So what would be the best temperature for a ball python? I like to keep mine right around 86 for the hot side.
So 86 is within a range. If you ask different people, they kind of keep their ball pythons at different temperatures. I personally keep it in the higher 88 range, sometimes even 90 if I have females that are looking to be bred. I do keep it closer to the 90 range just so that they're more comfortable, but most of the time throughout the year, otherwise, I'm sticking to that 88.
And what about humidity? I like to keep mine in the 70s. You don't want it too high, like in the 90s, because you're gonna you'll start leading into respiratory infections. But where do you keep yours at?
So typically, you want to keep it between 50 and 70%, depending on your room temperature and what you can do for daily spraying and such like that. And that's for just day to day. Whenever they're shedding, of course, you're going to want to bump that up. I would say bump that up to at least 80, if not getting closer to the 85. I do agree that 90% is probably too high, and you risk respiratory infection, and you also risk the bacteria getting into the air and actually sometimes causing scale rot as well.
So for those that don't know, what is scale rot and what is a respiratory infection?
So a respiratory infection is just like a respiratory infection for a human, and it's when you have too much moisture in the air and it'll cause their lungs to actually have fluid in their lungs, and so it makes it difficult for them to breathe. A good telltale sign of this infection going on with your ball python is you'll kind of start hearing some wheezing from them, and if you start hearing that, of course, the first thing I recommend is taking them to a vet, getting them checked out, making sure that they are perfectly fine, because sometimes they also just have a wheezing randomly, but if it tends to be, reoccurring and you also have high humidity, it would be a good, recommendation to take them to a vet.
Okay. Yeah. That's you said it word for word. Yeah. Most of the wheezing, if it's not with the respiratory infection, sometimes the substrate could get inside their mouth, and sometimes you have to go in there with the tweezers. You got to play, okay, where's the fish? Where's the reptichip or something? And that brings me up to the substrate. What would be the best substrate for a ball python?
So a lot of breeders, including myself, tend to use reptichip, or basically coconut coir. And the reason it is such a great substrate to use for ball pythons is because it is really great at retaining that humidity without being too humid, and it's not a high risk of mold. There are some substrates that when they start to get into that higher humidity that like the ball pythons need, unfortunately they have that risk of getting mold or mildew from being so wet for so long.
Excuse me. So, would you recommend as a paper towel? Would a paper towel be a good substrate?
So paper towels are a good and iffy choice. Paper towels are great for babies or like if you have a temporary enclosure for an animal that you just got. You're trying to put them through quarantine, which you should do with all new animals that you bring into your collection because you want to make sure that they're all good and healthy before introducing them to the same reptile room that you're in. But the problem with paper towels is that unless you are spraying it repeatedly, paper towels tend to lose moisture pretty quickly. So you'll have to keep up with spraying. But in terms of can it be used? Yes, it can. It's used a lot by breeders just because it's easy to clean up and it just is able to hold humidity for a short time.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I use both with my animals. I use paper towel and cocoa husk. So the paper towel will soak up any urine and stuff, and I can do an easy clean with that. And when it comes like with all animals, they're gonna do their business like humans do. So you just really got to make sure you can clean the enclosure so your snake could live a long, healthy life. And speaking of enclosures, what would be the best size?
So the size of enclosure is going to depend on how old your ball python is, but a forever size enclosure, a good rule of thumb for most snakes is going to be the length of the snake is either the length and width, or basically depth, of the enclosure added together should be equal to or more than the length of the snake. So if the snake is 4 feet, then the enclosure should be a minimum of 4 feet if you add the length and the depth. So if you get a female that has the potential of getting up to 5 feet, a good size and recommended size enclosure is a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot enclosure that gives about 6 feet, so it even has an extra foot for a little bit of stretching out space.
Okay. Yeah. So for those that are watching the live stream, there are pictures that I have shown, and the smack middle one is at the top. That's not on my social media, so y'all are getting a behind the scenes look on how I started. So I started in a shoebox or storage bin that has locking tabs. So that is Kimberly. She is my favorite. She is my daughter, I like to call her. So I just started off in a little shoebox. You don't need anything fancy. So I have her in a little shoebox, and the first month, she was on paper towel. I got a little hide. There was like a little water dish, if you can see it on the photo. And then I had the heat. So I'm weird when it comes to heat. So there's nothing wrong with belly heat. I don't use belly heat unless it's in my rack system. But for like in a typical enclosure, I have a radiating heat panel. So what that means is the heat radiates down on the hot side. So when I was messing with heat pads in the smaller enclosure, I didn't like it on the bottom. It didn't felt like getting hot enough because it's going through the paper. It's going through the plastic paper towel and then through the Reptichip to make it hot. So I put it on the side or I put it on the top. How do you put your heat pads on, or how do you use your heat for your ball python?
So I currently have my ball pythons in tubs just because they are either small enough or breeders, and I use heat tape along the bottom. If they're not inside the enclosure, the tubs go on top of the tape. But yes, radiant heat panels are basically, when it comes to enclosures, the best sources of heat are going to be either a radiant heat panel, ceramic heat emitter, or basking bulb, as in natural heating and lighting from up top like it would be for the sun.
Would you use a heat bulb for a ball python?
You can use a basking bulb for a ball python.
Or basking bulb, sorry.
But for any make sure that that heat source is on a thermostat. That thermostat will regulate the temperature to be sure that that temperature does not go over what you set it to and stays constant at the temperature that you want. I wouldn't use a basking spotlight, but I would use a halogen floodlight with a ball python. That is perfectly fine.
Okay. Yeah. Those are some other good, really good heat sources, but typically for ball pythons, you don't really want to use bulbs unless you absolutely want to. Everyone's different on how they take care of your animal. You always just have to make sure what's best for you, but you also got to make sure it's best for the animal. So the next enclosure that I have right next to Kimberly's enclosure, after a month, I bumped it up to a PVC enclosure. The PVC enclosure is like made out of a certain material that will hold humidity and hold the temperature really well, in my opinion. Do you agree, Savvy Scales, or do you prefer a different method?
PVC enclosures are actually really great. The sad part is that the most well-known enclosures are tanks. They tend to have screen lids. The reason those are not that great is because, like you said, the PVC enclosures are really great at holding humidity. And those glass tanks, because they have a screen lid, that humidity just completely flies out of the tank. So for a species like a ball python that needs that higher humidity, it would be very difficult and tasking in order to keep that humidity high in a glass tank. So a PVC tank is actually perfect for this kind of snake.
Yeah. So when Kimberly was up to size, and when I did the PVC, I waited until my next paycheck, or 2 paychecks. Kimberly was perfectly fine in that tub. I also put a towel around it to make it a little bit more darker on one side, because the ball python, you want to make sure they feel bigger in the enclosure. Okay. Sorry, y'all. There's some stuff happening in the background. I had to make sure everything was okay. But the PVC enclosure, when I moved Kimberly over there, as you see in the other picture, you want to make sure it's cluttered so they can explore and that they can feel secure in that enclosure. So, would you put, if you had to decorate your enclosure, Savvy Scales, could you give us a picture or a detailed picture on how you would decorate it?
So typically when I do a enclosure, I want to have minimum 2, if not 3 hides, water dish, and I'll have either coconut, I think they're like bark hides or something, but they're really great for the naturalistic look. I do tend to gravitate towards fake plants because it is easier to wash the enclosure when you need to clean it and take out the substrate, but there is always the option of a bioactive enclosure, and then that way you can have all kinds of real plants, cleanup crew, and everything, and it's very naturalistic.
Okay. Would you recommend, speaking of would you recommend a bioactive enclosure for a first timer that wants to get into reptiles?
I would not recommend it for a first timer. I only say that because a bioactive enclosure takes a lot of research, a lot of time. You have to plant the enclosure. You have to wait for the plants to firm themselves up in the substrate, make sure the cleanup crew is active and working, and it's very easy for a bioactive enclosure to actually die out if it is not properly taken care of. And if you already introduced an animal in there, it can be a lot of work to try and bring it back. So first-time owners, I say stick with fake plants and substrate, but if you want to explore the opportunity to give your snake a really realistic enclosure and do bioactive, do your research and go for it.
Yeah. Now, do your research. Always do your research on owning any animal, whether it's a dog or a cat, because animals do bite at the end of the day. Like, I still get bit by my animals every so often. It's not all the time, but it tends to happen. Like, I almost got tagged today when I did the water dish. she just did a fresh shed too, and so I skipped her meal. Uh, so on how I do things on feeding wise, I do frozen thawed. Um, when they're older, when they're babies, I will do live just to trigger that feeding response. But as they get older, I will transition into frozen thawed. How do you feed your animals?
I am very similar. So with the babies, when they're first born, they tend to gravitate towards instinct, and so they will need that live movement and warmth that they can sense and go after. But it is not unheard of, and I've actually had it happen for one of my own clutches, where the ball python will take a frozen thawed straight as its first meal and will never eat live its entire life, and it will never have to. And that means that this animal has a very great feeding response. But it is very common for babies to need live first, and as they transition into adulthood, I do transition them to live so that whoever is adopting my babies has an easy means of feeding their animals, because finding a live rodent supplier is a lot harder than being able to run down to Petco and get a frozen feeder, or wherever your local reptile shop is, to get that meal for them.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. Where should I get my food? And you answered that pretty spot on. So where I get my food from is from Fort Worth, called the Big Cheese Rodent Factory. They ship frozen, excuse me, they ship frozen not reptiles, frozen rats or mouse, whichever you prefer. And I just buy in bulk. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I just like to give them a shout out for those that are looking for frozen. And so on how I feed my animals, some people do it by the weight of the animal, and I think there's like math involved that people will subtract. I go by the girth of the animal, and so there are all different types of rats and mice, from sizes to lengths to color. And when it comes down to food, I don't know if your ball pythons are picky, but some of my ball pythons are absolutely picky. They wanted a certain temperature, they wanted a certain color, and they want it either dark, like what I mean by dark, like lights turned off and all that, and some want the lights off. Do you have any picky ball pythons?
I do. I have a female who has actually not eaten since July of last year, and she just is very picky and does not want to eat right now.
Yeah. So for babies, you want to make sure they're eating good, but as the ball python gets older, they will tend to go off food. So for ball pythons that go off for food, don't be alarmed. All right. Just monitor their weight, and they will eventually go back on food. It's just ball pythons can be very picky, so I would just keep that in mind when getting a ball python. But pretty much all my babies that I've grown up, and what I hear from my clients, they are still chomping down food. They have not gone off a hunger strike. So I feel like a lot of people miss that. Do you agree that ball pythons and some people miss that they go off of hunger strike and they freak out?
Yeah, a lot of people will ask those questions. They'll be like, hey, my ball python hasn't eaten in weeks. Is it going to be okay? You know, when does it warrant a vet trip? And just like Fred said, you want to just monitor their weight. So my female that hasn't eaten since July, her weight has not changed. 6 months not eating, and she has not lost any weight. And that's just because snakes are really fun that way. And I will say juveniles and babies, they tend to keep eating. It's not until they start getting bigger that they might have a little bit of that pickiness, but there have also been picky juveniles as well.
Yeah, one of my animals, Latte, sweetest guy. He is kind of skittish. But when he hit that 600-gram mark, he likes, I like to call it, he's weight watching. Uh, so he'll go off food for a little bit, but you'll find as they get older, they'll go off food. So if the animal does not take the food, what should you do with the rodent? If it's a frozen thawed or alive and they decided not to eat it, how do you deal with that?
So, unfortunately, it is a loss. It is not recommended to refreeze. It is not recommended to put it in the refrigerator and try in a couple hours. It is all you can do is throw out the rat. That's going to be the best practice because, unfortunately, once an animal was frozen and reaches back up to temperature, the bacteria inside will start to grow. And if it is not eaten that night while it's still warm and then in a digestion system, it will unfortunately start to grow bacteria that can be harmful potentially to your snake. So the best practice is to throw out the rodent if it did not eat it for frozen thawed. Obviously alive, if they did not take it, you can try again in a week. I would recommend no sooner than a week to try feeding the animal again. Let it have a week to just kind of chill and process. Nothing's going to be wrong with it. They'll be perfectly fine. Feed it a week later and see if it'll take it then.
Yeah. When they don't take my frozen thawed, I will feed it to another one. But I'm not gonna, if it's just been laying there in the enclosure, I'm not gonna take it out and give it to another animal. I'm gonna put it in a baggie and I'm gonna put it in my freezer for that night or the following day until I can go back into my yard. Now, if you live in the city, I would not recommend this. All right, dispose of it into the trash can when trash day happens. So when trash day comes around, take it out of the freezer, put it in the trash can, and then the trash people can take it. Now, since I live on a 3-acre lot, so what I'll do is I do this once a month. When I get a bunch of frozen used rats, I will march back to the end of my property. I will dig a hole and put the rodents in there. And I let Mother Nature take its course. Now, does it attract other animals? Absolutely. There's been signs that they've dug up the hole and taken the rodent, which is fine. It's the circle of life. So that's what I do now. Like before, when I lived in the city, wait until trash day, take it out of the freezer, and then take your trash to the edge of the street or however you dispose of your trash on trash day, because they will stink. I'm not gonna lie, rodents do stink when they've been thawed out and they've been left out for a while. They stink. So that's just my recommendation. And then when I do the following days, if they don't eat, I clean their enclosure. So what would be the best cleaning solution for your ball python?
There are some reptile safe cleaners out there that you can buy in store, but a lot of times Dawn dish soap, washing it like a dish is good, or even if you're spraying it and just wiping it, a good like vinegar, baking soda, and water kind of mixture would be good. You won't want to use any harmful chemicals, like you're not going to grab your 401 from under the counter and spray that in there. That can be harmful to the snake. So you want to keep something that's, vinegar, water, maybe a little bit of baking soda, or vinegar, Dawn dish soap and water. There's a bunch of different naturalistic, non-harmful mixtures that you can make at home, but there are reptile-safe cleaners that you can buy Amazon or Petco or PetSmart, and those will be perfectly safe to use as long as you follow the directions on the bottle.
Yeah, so what I like to do, since I have mine in like tub systems, I would just take the tub out and I would do a full tub swap and I'll just clean. But for something that's in a PVC enclosure, just use the spray stuff like she mentioned. I like, if it's on Reptichip, I will actually take I'll take the handful of Reptichip out where the rodent is, and I will throw that away so mold doesn't get in there. uh, because it also, if it's underneath the heat source, it will cook a rodent as well. And then I randomly found this question on new ball python groups. So I think this will revert back to the enclosure. But someone asked, what is the best enclosure that prevents escape?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, snakes tend to be escape artists. So you wouldn't want to use an enclosure that has large enough gaps for them to get their head through. They will get stuck or they will escape. And it is a task to find a snake that has gotten lost. They don't make noise, so you can't listen for them. A lot of times, PVC enclosures that have sliding doors do work well, but you do have to keep in mind that the gap between the two doors, you want to make sure is not too wide for the snake to squeeze through. And you can actually put a lock on those sliding doors to keep them from opening as well. That would probably be the best enclosure to make sure that they can't escape, is something with sliding glass doors and no large gaps anywhere. But of course, or a container that has latches and no big gaps would also be well.
Yeah, I think the last time one of my animals escaped, I want to say it's been almost a year, maybe two. Because I also keep mine behind. I don't leave my animals out in the open where people can walk by and see. I like to keep mine behind a closed door. So, for God forbid, if they got out for some mythical, magical reason, they are still contained in the reptile room. For some people that don't have the luxury, that is perfectly fine. But yeah, snakes can be escape artists. And accidents do happen during like cleaning and stuff. You take your eye off your animal, and somehow it will slither out and it will go somewhere. So when I do a full deep clean on my PVC enclosures, I'll have a bin right next to me, and I'll put Kimberly in that enclosure as temporary, and then once I get it all clean, I will let it dry with the radiant heat panel, and I'll take Kimberly out, put her around my shoulders for good husbandry. Now, can we go in depth? Now, is it husbandry? Am I using that? No. What's the word I'm thinking of? Enrichment. Enrichment. That's the word I was looking for. Should you give your ball python enrichment?
If you have the ability to provide enrichment for your snake, you should. It is something that is a great benefit. Is it something that your snake is not going to live a good life without? No. If you take your ball python out and kind of just let it explore on you, hang out with you on the couch, that's plenty of enrichment. You don't have to do anything really extravagant, but I have heard of people using like these foldable dog playpens, and they'll put a whole bunch of different climbing materials in there for them to adventure on, and all it is just moving them from their same old enclosure and putting them in a different environment. But it can even be as simple as whenever you clean their enclosure, changing up their enclosure, moving things. Now, ball pythons can also be picky and not eat if you do that because they're fun that way. But that's also enrichment.
Yeah. Now, I'm gonna piggyback off of Snake Discovery a little bit. For record, she's an awesome person. I haven't personally met her, but I've seen a lot of her videos. Great person to do research on as well, or listen from her. But she asked a really great question. And when you buy your animal at a show, what should you do with it? Should you carry it around, or should you put it in like a bag inside of a purse?
The best course of action if you're going to an expo and there's a possibility of you buying an animal, the first thing is you want to make sure that you are getting that animal when you're about to leave. You do not want to be carrying it around the expo. You don't want to have it out in the open, even if it's in a snake bag. That animal wants to get home and be secure. So first off, before you buy any animal, like we were talking about with research, you want to have their enclosure set up, ready to go, having the proper temperatures, so that when you go out and actually physically purchase this animal, you can bring it home, put it in its enclosure, and leave it for a week and let it settle in. But a lot of times, vendors and breeders at reptile expos, if you ask them, they will keep the snake in its display case and mark it as sold while you continue to browse around the expo. This way, you're not worried about carrying around the snake and having it get, tossed around in a purse, or carrying it around and possibly having it get lost. The best course of action is, if you are not leaving right as you are purchasing the animal, ready to take off and go home, have the breeder hold on to it until you're ready to leave, so that that animal is safe and secure until you're ready to leave.
Yeah. Good example right there. Yeah. Just make sure when you buy that animal, make it the last thing, or second to last thing if you need Reptichip as well. But yeah, always try to have the enclosure first. I think that's what my mistake was when I first bought Kimberly, is I never had an enclosure ready. But the person I bought Kimberly from, he was selling these like little starter kits with the hive, a little bit of Reptichip and paper towel in there, ready to go. All I just need is a water dish, and then go over to a supplier that had the thermostat and humidity gauge and temperature gauge and a heat pad. So I wasn't ready to go when I first bought Kimberly, but I was eager to learn. Now every spot's gonna be different where you're gonna put your enclosure. So I had Kimberly in my bedroom at my Dallas house, and it would just always get cold. For some reason, I couldn't get it up to temperature. So I moved her into my middle bedroom, and the temperature was working great. Like, it was up to temperature. So it will take about 24 hours, at least for me, to get everything acclimated humidity-wise and temperature-wise. Do you think it takes about 24 hours to get the temperature and humidity almost perfect?
I would say it can take that long, because you also want to make sure that your thermostat is actually going to provide the proper temperature. You're going to want the temperature gun in addition to an actual thermometer, because the thermometer measures the air temperature, and then the temperature gun is going to measure the surface temperature. And you want to make sure that that surface temperature is not too high, and sometimes it may take a 24-hour cycle for your thermostat and the heat in the enclosure to fully get up to temperature and be regulated before you're ready to introduce the animal.
Yeah. I don't use a temp gun. I like to use, and there's nothing wrong with temp guns. Everyone's different. I think it's a great idea. I like to use Govies. I'm a big fan of Govies. This is not sponsored, by the way. They're Bluetooth. They're wireless. So if you have a thermostat and you had to go to work and you want to check in on what your thermostat says, you can always pull up the app and look at the temperature and humidity while you're at work. I use that for all my ball pythons, and the display is pretty good. It lasts pretty good. Make sure you swap the batteries out every so often. But that's what I use for my enclosures. What thermostats do you use?
I actually have a thermostat off of Amazon. It's, honestly been working really well. And until it goes bad, I'm not going to say I need to get anything more expensive, but they do have the best recommended thermostats are going to be like your Herpstat or a Vivarium Electronics thermostat. I just have, I want to say it's like it starts with a B or something, but it's just off of Amazon. It's like $20, and it's better to have best brand but works than to not have it on a thermostat.
Yeah. It's like one of those things, you'd rather have it and not need it, and not need it and have it. Do you have any questions for me? We got about another 2 minutes.
I think we're pretty good here. I guess, if anything, maybe, do you have any recommendations for somebody who is getting an adult opposed to a baby at first? Let's say they've got the enclosure all set up and everything, but they're not sure if an adult is the best way to go because they're worried that the adult is, as some people say for rescue dogs, damaged goods and might not be as friendly as a baby.
So I would sort of recommend an adult, fully grown adult, but keep in mind, if you don't pay attention to it when you put it around your neck, it could, there's the hazard that it could choke you. But I think adult would be a great almost starter to figure out, is this what you want? Due to the fact they won't get any bigger than that. So if you want a bigger snake, but you don't want that big of a snake to start off, a fully grown ball python would be perfect, and you can only probably feed it about once a month. That saves on cost. Like a rodent for that size is like $5, $6, versus a baby where you kind of have to feed it almost weekly to get it up to size. But there's also nothing wrong with babies. If you want to explore the option on how slow growth they do, I think a baby would be perfect. But if you turn out you don't want the animal at the end of the day, find a breeder, find someone that will take it, and just don't throw it in the wild. I don't like when people throw snakes, ball pythons out in the wild. They won't survive.
And also, do not rehome for free. Always make sure to have a rehoming fee. It keeps animals safe and actually going to a good home.
Yeah. So that's all the time that we have for right now. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like. I have left Savvy Scales social media down below in the description, so go ahead and check her out. Don't you have shows coming up, Savvy?
I do. I have a public show coming up this weekend. It's going to be at the Durham Armory in North Carolina, in case any watchers are from North Carolina. The Durham Armory off of Foster Street. It's going to be the Geek and Grub Market, and I'll be there with a couple of my ambassadors that you can meet. One of those being a ball python, and you can see just how friendly and how big they can start to get.
Yeah, I think that's a great offer right there. I have some shows coming up, but they're you would have to pay for my animals. But if you absolutely want to hold one for the very first time, I do not have a problem with that. I will also be selling Reptiles as well. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and if you have any other questions, put them in the comment section below, and we'll be happy to answer. Thanks so much, and you guys have a